Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Worst Case Macchiato. It is episode 18, and we're recording in the same day as we did for episode 17, so there's no any new updates about our lives or any cases as we know of. So, today I am talking about two different cases, so I'm splitting it up today. And they are both cases in the Orangeville area, which is the area that I mostly grew up in. I moved there when I was 7, when I just turned 7, and then I was there until I graduated high school. But both of these cases are unsolved, which is interesting about the area. But just obviously every single episode, there probably should be a trigger warning because a lot of these cases are violent and a lot of people do die in them. But the second case includes animal cruelty, so listener discretion is definitely advised for the second case. I will give another trigger warning when I'm transitioning into the second case. But the first case I'm going to talk about is a case of a murdered woman named Sonia Varaschin. Sonia Varaschin was born in 1968 to Attilio and Michelle Varaschin, and she was their second-born child of 4. Her father, Attilio, emigrated from Italy and married his wife, Michelle, a French-Canadian, before settling down in the Toronto area. Their firstborn son, Vivien, died in a car accident when he was just an infant, which already had large impacts on the Varaschins. And then shortly thereafter, Sonia was born, and then her younger brother, Viv, and sister Nadia were born a few years after Sonia. Growing up, her parents described her as a bright and happy child, keeping herself busy with dance lessons and skiing, which they said brought her a lot of happiness. And also growing up, she had always been into fashion, so she started selling wedding dresses in a small store in Toronto after she graduated high school, but she didn't remain there for very long. Typically, like any young adult, she didn't know exactly what she wanted to do with her life, so she ended up moving across the country to Alberta and stayed there for a while until she figured out what she wanted to do for her career. She eventually decided that she wanted to help people, so she returned to Ontario and went to school for nursing because she wanted to become a pediatric nurse. So she graduated with honors from Humber College and was hired by the Toronto Children's Hospital, where she worked in the burn unit and a cancer ward. Obviously, working with children in general is very difficult, especially in a hospital, because like they're so small and tiny, and like seeing them hurt is like so detrimental. But
they're so vulnerable.
Yeah, and like it's so sad to know that like so early on in their life they're already struggling, and like obviously this was very hard for her, seeing as she cared so much for people, but she was especially known by everyone that she knew for being loving, and she enjoyed caring for her patients. And a lot of her coworkers noted that her empathy for others was unlike any other person they've ever met. And according to her mom, Sonia saved every single card and drawing her patients and their families ever gave her, and she actually would hang them up around her house so she could see them every day, which is just adorable, in my opinion.
That is literally me. So when we worked in long-term care, like during COVID, like I was a security guard, like I wasn't like a healthcare person or anything. I did work healthcare at my other job. I do work healthcare, but when like residents would like pass away, like their families would always get us like thank you cards and write like little notes to us, and it was like the cutest thing ever, and I still have all of those. And like when I got my promotion to supervisor, one of the residents wrote me a congratulations card and like said that they were proud of me and for all of that, what my future holds. Like they were really excited. It was cute. Actually, ironically, his parents live in Barrie, actually.
Oh my gosh, what are the odds?
Yeah, so he's like, yeah, like my parents live in Barrie, and I'm like, and he's like our parents' age too, and he was like, he was the sweetest, and I was like, I'm gonna miss him so much once our contract was done, and then he now lives actually in a different long-term care home, but he's super, super nice, like, yeah, so.
Is that when you were doing COVID screening? Like that's what you're talking about? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So Sonia eventually left the Toronto Children's Hospital and took a job at South Lake Regional Health Center in Newmarket. It was a little bit closer to home, got her out of the big city. In 2010, when she was about 42 years old, Sonia was living in Orangeville, which is about an hour west of Toronto for those who don't know, and it wasn't far from her parents' house, who they actually lived in Bolton, which is about 40 minutes northeast of Orangeville, and it was about probably 15 minutes away from my mom's house in Brampton. Sonia bought a townhome in Orangeville in a neighborhood right off the highway, and she had just accepted a position at a pharmaceutical company in 2010, and she was supposedly very excited about it. At that time, she had a boyfriend, a job she loved, and she was close to their family, who always supported her. On Sunday, August 29th, 2010, Sonia was in Bolton having lunch with her parents at her home, and Sonia's mom states that Sonia seemed really happy with how her life was going. And then Sonia's brother called and asked Sonia if she wanted to go on the lake with him on the jet skis that afternoon, but Sonia declined, and she said that her new job at the pharmaceutical company required her to be bilingual, so she had to go home and brush up on her French just to make sure that she was ready. And later that evening, once Sonia was back home, she called her mom and left a voicemail and asked if she would bake a cake for a friend who was coming to visit her. And this was the last time that her mom would ever hear her voice. On Monday, August 30th, Orangeville police responded to a report of an abandoned vehicle behind the town hall. When they arrived around 10 a.m., they found a white Toyota Corolla parked in the narrow alleyway, its doors and trunk left open. Police quickly noticed on the rear bumper that there were smears of blood. They immediately taped off the scene and ran the vehicle's plates, and it was registered to Sonia Varaschin. While the police were processing Sonia's car, her family was wondering where she was, as she hadn't shown up for work that day, which was completely out of character for her. Sonia's parents tried to call her, and she wasn't picking up, so they called the Orangeville police rather quickly, and they reported her missing. So the police quickly put the pieces together. They had an abandoned car, smeared with blood, and the owner of the vehicle has not been seen since the day before, right? So clearly something happened to Sonia, or Sonia did something, right? Those were the two options that they were left with. So Sonia's car was parked behind the town hall, less than a mile away from Sonia's townhouse, which is the next place that the investigators went. And upon arrival, their suspicions were confirmed. There was blood on the front steps, and Sonia was nowhere to be found. The police knocked on doors in the neighborhood, but it seemed that nobody saw or heard anything unusual. And one of the neighbors even noted that she had her windows open that night because the weather and temperature were really nice, so she didn't hear anything with her windows open. So that matched with no signs of forced entry. It seemed that Sonia willingly let someone into her house and then was probably caught by surprise. So she more than likely knew who this person was that would eventually have killed her. But at this point, with no body, she was just reported missing. So at this point, she's just missing. The Orangeville police called in the Ontario Provincial Police, which I'm not going to continue saying the Ontario Provincial Police, so I'm just going to say the OPP, just for people who aren't from Ontario. But they called in the OPP for assistance. The OPP quickly set up a dedicated tip line and asked the public to call with any and all information, no matter how small, which is typical. Teams searched the areas near Sonia's home and the park next to the town hall, and the OPP even had helicopters and canine units deployed to cover more ground. The news that a woman had disappeared and possibly been attacked spread quickly through Orangeville, seeing as it is a very small geographical town. A town that was generally perceived as being peaceful and safe now seemed like it was not safe anymore, right? This person potentially attacked somebody, and the body and them are missing. So on September 3rd, investigators held a press conference to release an official statement about how Sonia had been missing for 5 days and that they still didn't have a suspect. They did note, however, that they believed that she was a victim of foul play. According to Detective Inspector Mark Pritchard, investigators had found blood inside Sonia's home, including a long blood trail leading from the front door all the way into the driveway, indicating that when the suspect left the scene, they were probably covered in a significant amount of blood. Pritchard also announced that a beige fitted bed sheet and a matching comforter were missing from Sonia's home, so they believed that the comforter and the sheet were probably soaked in blood and were probably used to transport Sonia's body. The investigators also believed that the suspect used Sonia's car to remove her from her home, which they then abandoned in the car behind the town hall. And it was believed by the police that the suspect was probably familiar with the Orangeville area due to the fact that behind the town hall, like, nobody uses that alleyway, like, because there's nothing behind there. They assumed that they were familiar with the Orangeville area and familiar with Sonia. Whether she knew them on a deep personal level or not, she had to have known them to let them in. On September 5th, a man walking his dog in the neighboring town of Caledon, which literally, Orangeville is a random pocket in Dufferin County, and on one side is Caledon and the other side is Mono. So like it's like situated right in between the two areas. And the man walking the dog found a body of a woman left on the side of a dirt road. 2 days later, investigators confirmed that the body was that of Sonia Varaschin. So it was about...
So, sorry, who found her body?
A resident of Caledon who was walking his dog.
Okay.
On a dirt road. Like, he was walking on a...
Yeah.
Like a country road.
I just totally, for some reason, it like went over my head when you said
it's all
where
good.
she was found, so just wanted to confirm.
So, investigators confirmed that the body was that of Sonia Varaschin, and the OPP ruled Sonia's death as a homicide, but they did not release any further details about how she died and at what time exactly during the night she died, preferring to keep that information confidential to preserve the investigation, naturally. They urged residents of Dufferin County areas to come forward with any tips they may lead to an arrest, and they also put forth a $2,000 reward that would lead in an arrest of somebody. Authorities announced that they believe Sonia's killer wore a specific brand of work boots in men's size 10 or 11, so obviously it was somebody over the age of, 16, I would say.
So there was boot impressions left, I'm assuming, where her body was located, or?
Yeah, in the blood.
Okay.
Not like where her body was found, but in her house.
Oh, okay.
And then the boots were either made by Wind River or Dakota, brands that were at this time sold exclusively at Mark's Work Warehouse, which is a Canadian clothing retailer with hundreds of stores across Canada. So, like, not saying that it came specifically from the store in Orangeville, but it's one of the brands that only sold to Mark's Work Warehouse.
Interesting. I didn't know that those two brands were like ever exclusive to only one store. That's actually honestly fascinating. I had no idea.
Yeah, like I don't know if they still are, but at this point they were. One of the sources I looked at said it was.
I think you can get Wind River at Sport Check now too, which is all part of the Forsani group or whatever. So it's all owned by the same people that own Marks and stuff and Canadian Tire and that stuff.
That's true. So as weeks and months passed after the accident, police continued to investigate, but the case seemed to become pretty stagnant really quickly. They continued to interview people close to Sonia, including her boyfriend Ian, who actually was a married man that Sonia had been seeing on and off for the past year. Yeah. Okay. But he was cleared as a suspect, so it is what it is. Every lead that investigators had seemed to fizzle out, so they were kind of left with nowhere to really turn to. There were two other cases of women of similar ages and life circumstances that were attacked within a 30-mile radius, only months apart from Sonia's murder, that they thought that could possibly have been, like, connected.
Yeah.
So on October 6, 2010, Adrienne Roberts, a 33-year-old paramedic from Guelph, was found murdered in the basement of her home. And on December 8th, Shelley Loader, a 44-year-old photographer, was brutally attacked in her studio in Mono, which is located just minutes outside of Orangeville. Like, the job that I had in the Orangeville area before moving to London, that is located in Mono. So, like, That's how, like, close it is. Shelley did manage to survive her attack, though, and was able to give police a description of her assailant, but her attackers still slipped into the shadows, so he was never caught. So that attacker is still out there. But despite the remarkable similarities in the victimology between these three women, the investigators couldn't find any tangible evidence that actually linked the cases together, just that they were of the same victimology. Adrian's husband also was later convicted for her murder, so they assume that case is like very much cased off. They didn't say, like, I didn't look into why he would, like, what was the reason for him murdering her if he did murder her. I just left it aside. In December 2010, investigators in Sonia's case announced that they had partnered with the America's FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, shout out to my Criminal Minds fans, to develop a criminal profile of the person they believed killed Sonia. So the BAU's profile noted that Sonia's killer was a man who was not only familiar with the town of Orangeville, but also the rural roads where Sonia's body was later found. He would have displayed altered behavior after killing Sonia, possibly drinking more heavily than usual, or he probably missed work for an extended period of time after. And he may also have tried isolating himself, and anyone who would have been trying to get, like, anyone who was interacting with him or trying to get in contact with him, he probably got really irritated and very violent with them. The profile also suggested that the killer may have moved out of his house in the first few weeks of September after the attack, and investigators hoped that this new profile would jog someone's memory and generate new leads, but months continued to pass with no arrests. In early 2011, Detective Andy Karski took over as lead investigator for the case and began re-interviewing people. Karski soon discovered that Sonia had been involved in some conflict at the health center where she had worked before taking the position at the pharmaceutical company. So a few weeks prior to her death, Sonia had been confronted by a supervisor as she had changed the dosage of a patient's medication without authorization, which obviously is a huge no-no. Like, she was a nurse. She's not allowed to, like, authorize different dosages. And
the only way you would be able to is if you're a nurse practitioner, which does not sound like she was.
No, she was not. So Sonia had told her mom that the confrontation created unbearable tension between the co-workers, which was the reason why she left the health center and accepted the job with the pharmaceutical company. And Karski explored this avenue because, like, that could just be bad blood that resulted in this, but apparently Sonia left the job on her own terms, and there didn't seem to be any hard feelings on either side after she had left. So
just good.
Yeah, so he kind of ruled it out. And another avenue Karski explored was Sonia's digital footprint, which is obviously very common nowadays. Investigators had Sonia's computer in their possession and discovered that she had been communicating with several men on the dating site Plenty of Fish, known as POF or POF. Investigators...
Sketchy.
Yeah.
So many sketchy guys on that website.
Well, anyone can create anything and put anything up it, like, you know?
Well, like,
so.
Yeah, that goes for anything, but I find, like, especially, like, POF, like, has been one of those websites where it's, like, it's been very eerie and sketchy to me. Like, I don't know. I've never had, like, a good feeling about that site, ever.
No, it's very weird.
Yeah.
But investigators began to question if Sonia had been killed by someone she met online, which widened the pool of potential suspects exponentially, obviously. Because, like, even if there was an account and whatever, like, that person could have used it at, like, a public library, or it could be someone using under a false name, false pictures. Like, it makes it so much more difficult.
Yeah.
On May 24th, 2011, investigators from the OPP asked members of the public to voluntarily submit DNA samples to rule out people and family members. In a press conference, Karski made it clear that they had the killer's DNA. He announced that by providing a DNA sample, citizens will assist in the efforts to catch the person responsible for the senseless and brutal slaying of Sonia and bring them to justice. It is completely confidential, and by agreeing to provide this voluntary sample, you will be doing a great service to your community and public safety. This was highly criticized, especially by the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, which said that this move in asking for people to voluntarily submit their DNA was coercive, saying that individuals would feel obligated to give up their privacy for the sake of the community. The investigators did defend their actions and decisions, saying that the samples would be destroyed after the investigation, which I guess swayed the opinions of everyone else, and they'd move forward with their plan. And over the next 15 months, they collected over 600 DNA samples from people.
Like people that voluntarily gave it,
Yeah.
I wouldn't. Like even though I've never done anything, I like just
Yeah.
would not.
Which, like, honestly, like, if you think about it, 28,000, like, that's not a huge percentage of the community, really, that gave their sample. But 600 is still, like, you still have all of their relatives that probably didn't give a DNA sample that are now also included in that, like, in the expanse of above the 600. So, like, and especially in Orangeville, it's a small town, a lot of cousins, a lot of, like, extended family members that are, like, now they're all tied in to being ruled out or potentially seen as a suspect, whatever, if that was the case. But this came with no avail. They didn't, like, there's still no arrest from the 600 samples. On the 3-year anniversary of Sonia's death, police announced that they increased the reward for any information leading to the arrest of Sonia's killer from $2,000 to $50,000. So a huge jump in the reward money. On the 4-year anniversary, the police released an extremely grainy surveillance video. Like, you should see it. Like, it's so bad and grainy that, like, nobody would be able to make out who it was, really. But the video did show 2 people in a park gazebo, which was near Sonia. Like, it was in the park where Sonia's car was abandoned. And, like, I've been to this gazebo before. Like, because me and my friends, like, we got ice cream and then, like, we walked to the park and, like, we were, like, talking in the gazebo and stuff. So, like, it is close to town hall. It is very much downtown. But the individuals apparently were later found and ruled out as suspects, so nothing came of that. 7 years in, Detective Glassford said that he hoped new DNA technology could help them move forward with identifying their suspect. And then another year passed. Glassford said they were closer than ever to solving the case. So this was in 2018 at this point. And, of course, being Sonia's family, they obviously were and still are frustrated about the case because nothing's been solved. Like, they have no, like, and they have no, like, real leads on who it was or whatever. And this person is out there somewhere. Like, whether they're alive or dead now, like, only they would know. But that person is a violent individual who's out there. Just, they could turn at any moment and kill somebody else. You know, like, it's very dangerous. So Sonia's parents eventually moved out of their Bolton home because they wanted to get away from the painful memories of everything to do with Sonia, and especially since they had lost their firstborn son in a car accident, which was already traumatic, and then now they lost Sonia. They lost half of their children to unfortunate circumstances. But as far as I could tell, they're still together though. So, like, it didn't really have, like, a huge effect on their relationship, and it didn't, like, destroy that relationship, which I find is, like, really, really nice and uncommon. It might, it's probably because, maybe it's because, like, Sonia was 40, like, when she died, but, like, 2 extreme circumstances of losing children, like, I'm surprised that they stayed together. Sonia's younger siblings are now raising families of their own. They both moved out of the area as well, so, like, they're not even in the area either. And they both have children, and they will never know who their aunt was. So, which is unfortunate, and, like, it's the same thing, like, I remember, like, the Delphi murders, like, last week, like, it's just not getting the restitution for, like, getting closure and stuff for everything with, like, the attacks and stuff. It's unfair to everyone who knew her on such a deep level.
Well, like, especially because, like, some families never get closure because the cases drag on for so long with no resolution that, like, their loved ones who, like, fought for answers for so long never got them because they're no longer with us to see the justice for their loved ones and stuff. So
yeah, which will be the case in the second case that I'm going to be talking about, because it was a case from the 80s, so it is very much, like, a lot of the family members that have died. The $50,000 reward is still available for anybody that has information that leads to the arrest and the conviction of Sonia's killer.
No
Nope, it's still unsolved.
Still in unsolved case.
There's no public suspect. There's no anybody that's currently locked up for trial. It's completely open, and it's been 13 years now. So, yeah. So anyone with any information is being asked to contact the OPP directly at 1-888-310-1122, or to contact Crime Stoppers anonymously at 1-800-222-8477, which both numbers will be in the description, so people don't have to replay the numbers if they feel that they want to contact them. So that is the end of that case, which is not a good ending, but this entire episode is a not very happy ending case. So
that's fair. I mean, it is like we often we have covered cases. I think all the cases we've covered, I think so far, have had a resolution to them for the most part, but I do think that it is important to bring awareness to those that don't actively have a resolution, so that if anybody does have any information or does know anything about these cases, can come forward and potentially provide leads to get a resolution to these unsolved cases and bring closure to the families for their loved ones.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I do think that is super important that we cover them.
And also, the reason I wanted to do both of these cases today was because since they're from a small town in Canada, they're not talked about. And
they don't get the stuff that bigger cities, like even Toronto, being so close to Toronto is going to get the more media spotlight than a town like Orangeville or a town like Petawawa, or a rural town will get.
Yeah, and also
it just doesn't get the media coverage it deserves.
Yeah, exactly. And out of all our cases, I think the only other case that was left open and not closed was the case of Bryce Laspisa, who was, remember when he fell off a cliff and his body's never been found. So that is the only other open one, other than the two cases that I'm covering today. But do you have any other points or questions about her case?
I don't think so. I mean, it's pretty... There's not too much to it, but yeah. So let's continue to the next one.
Yeah, so for the next case, again, this is just the second trigger warning. Nearing the end of this case, I'm going to be talking about animal cruelty, so I will also let you guys know then right before I do it, just so if you want to listen to most of the case and then do the rest of your looking into it on your own, you can. But listener discretion is advised for that, because I have to go into detail about it, unfortunately, to show how horrible some people are in this case. So I'm talking about a couple missing boys from Caledon, which I used to actually drive by the houses of these two boys every day to go to work when I was working in Mono. So and I actually drove on this road every day, which is almost haunting for me. So
that is crazy.
Yeah. So on the evening of August 24th, 1981, 14-year-old Eric Larsfolk, whose family had only just moved into a white farmhouse on Horseshoe Hill Road in Caledon a few weeks prior, pedaled his new bike down the dusty gravel driveway. Eric's father, Lloyd, which Lloyd is a very key person in this case, as both of the dads are. So Lloyd is Eric's father. He watched his son disappear in the direction of the McCormick farm, which was less than a kilometer up the road from their house, suspecting that he was probably going to hang out with the McCormick's 13-year-old daughter, Kim McCormick, because they hung out a lot, so they were really close friends. Eric didn't know that Kim would be babysitting for the Lalonde family, who lived up the road from them. At this time, Eric barely knew Kim's older brother, John Jr., who was 15 years old. However, they both disappeared on the same night, never to be seen again. So, two boys that were suspected to never hung out, never really knew each other that well, both disappeared together. The Lars folks hadn't been in the area long enough to know John McCormick Sr.'s reputation. He was volatile, he was a paranoid alcoholic, he loved guns, and the OPP had reportedly been called out to their property on numerous occasions. Kim McCormick later told Jen Patton, who was a forensic case consultant, in an interview that her father kept a mini fridge beside his bed and drank from the moment he woke up until the moment he went to bed. So he was drinking all day long every day. She also noted that his drinking fueled his violent temper, which was almost always directed at John Jr., who quote-unquote irritated him. Eric's older brother Dave couldn't remember the exact moment the McCormicks came into their lives, but he remembers that it was his and Eric's younger sister who befriended Kim McCormick at some point during the summer of 1981. And Dave was actually the one of 3 children who actually became friends with John Jr., not Eric. When 17-year-old Dave joined his family in Caledon, Kim brought John Jr. over to the Larsfolk's home, and by this point, Eric and Kim had already been acquainted. So Eric and Kim had already been hanging out for a couple weeks, and then when Dave came into the picture, John and him became acquainted. John Jr. had spent most of the summer away from Caledon. He was sent to Virginia to be with his relatives for the summer. He had an explosive fight with his father, and some sources said that John Jr.'s arm had actually been broken, but it hasn't been confirmed or denied through reports whether his arm was broken or not. But nonetheless, he was sent to Virginia with his relatives, and he returned on August 14th, only a few weeks after Dave came into Caledon and only 10 days before he disappeared. During the 10 days before he disappeared, he and Dave hung out a lot. Dave noted that he remembered them sneaking into the McCormick house and stealing a beer from John Sr.'s mini fridge, as teenage boys do. Like, let's just get real. Well, teenage children do in general. But Dave also remembered driving the black Chevy field car with John Jr., and vividly remembered John Sr. standing on the balcony of the house yelling at John Jr., and he also vividly remembered John Jr. flipping him off. So, John Jr., John Sr.
Welcome to my life. You flip me off all the time.
I flip everybody off all the time. But I only do it when I'm comfortable with people. So, good. But John Jr., John Sr., not in a good standing with each other. So the night prior to the boys' disappearance, John Jr. and his friend and neighbor, Dwayne Spears, had been out late in Orangeville. And this actually ended up in Dwayne Spears being grounded, so he wasn't able to hang out with John Jr. So he was supposed to hang out with John Jr. the day that he disappeared, but since he was grounded, he didn't get to hang out with him, which is honestly saved by the bell, because he probably would have disappeared as well. But Eric's presence at the McCormick farm that night, his unfamiliarity with John Jr., and John Jr.'s rocky relationship with his father are among the few details agreed upon by their families, but the families disagreed on almost everything else. So at around 11 p.m. on the night of August 24th, Lloyd Larsfolk jumped due to a frantic pounding on the door. It was Joyce McCormick, which is John and Kim's mother, who informed him that the 2 boys were missing. There was no trace of Eric and John Jr. anywhere. The only clue was John Jr.'s beat-up black Chevy farm car. The car was discovered skidded to a stop with its hood and door open inside the gate to a gravel pathway at the edge of the field behind the McCormick's house, which leads to a gravel pit behind it. So this gravel pit is like literally just gravel land, and it has like a huge like dip. It's almost like a pond or whatever,
like,
right?
Like
so
standard, it's standard like gravel pits. Like we have a bunch of them around here too.
And it's
I'm literally
covered in water.
I just kind of pulled up pulled up a thing on like the internet while you're talking, and like the first one that I clicked on, like I was just scrolling, and it literally there's a picture that came up, and it says the main path leading from the McCormick farm to the gravel pit in July of 2021.
Yeah, it's
I see what you're talking about because I can see it right now.
Yeah, so like it is just like a huge gravel pit filled with water. The boys' bikes were found at the top of the driveway leaning against the house, so they left everything and they just disappeared. And the car was crashed into the woods, like it was just left in there. So when Dave returned home from Fort Erie, because he was gone back to where they moved from because he was spending a weekend with his old friends, he joined the search of the McCormick farm, and he took immediate notice of the black Chevy, which was out of place. Dave noted that John Jr. took pride in every single farm car he ever had. He had 6 to 8 of them, so he had a lot. And he always kept them neatly parked in a clearing between the field and the gravel pit. So the fact that it was just left abandoned with doors and that wide open, like in the middle of like a grass path, there was just something off about it. But Dave said that he knew why the hood of the car was open and that he'd been the one to help John Jr. figure out how to start the car, which is... Yeah. So since the car had no ignition, Dave said it was a two-person job to start the Chevy. One person had to attach wires together and the other person had to put a screwdriver between the two terminals of the starter and turn it. So, like, it was very clear probably that John Jr. and Eric were trying to start the car. Like, start the car back up probably from on the gravel path.
Yeah.
In 2011, a former journalist named Andrew Livingstone wrote a series about the case of the missing boys in Caledon in the Caledon newspaper called Caledon Enterprise. He had spent time getting to know Eric's father, Lloyd, who passed away on August 30th, 2021, so he died not knowing what happened to his son, unfortunately.
That's absolutely heartbreaking. So you said his dad died in 2021?
Yep. He was like 90 years old.
So obviously, yeah, I was going to say, like, so obviously there's no resolution to this case.
Yeah.
At that time, so that's a long time. That's like, what, 40 plus years at this point?
Yeah, that's 40 years of him not knowing. Yeah. It's really unfortunate.
And they were, what, early teenagers when they disappeared, right? Like 13
Eric was 14 and 15? John Jr. was 15.
Okay, 14 and 15, yeah.
So Lloyd reminisced about Eric's willingness to help at the family's greenhouse business back in Fort Erie before Larsfolk lost the business and had to move the family to Caledon. He talked about Eric's love for hockey, Scouts Canada, fishing, and his eagerness to start school in the fall at Mayfield Secondary School. Lloyd also shared his vivid memories of August 24th. He said that he remembers crawling in the dirt and in heavy blackness, looking for broken branches in the pine trees that lined the gravel pit, consumed by the fear that someone had carried his son away through the dense forest on the McCormick's 100-acre property. As chaos unfolded that night, Lloyd remembers how John Sr. sat inside the house on the couch drinking a beer, not helping with the search or the investigation at all.
That, like, literally would irk me so much. Like, if my kids were missing, like, I would be out there scouring, and you would not find me sitting at home not looking for my children.
Yeah, and, I mean, it just shows who John Sr. is, right? Like, that, like...
No Father of the Year award there, that's for sure.
No, obviously not. So, John Sr. apparently told Lloyd that he had a friend over that night, and that maybe the boys stowed away in the back of the pickup, and that his friend was apparently heading out west. He threw it out there that possibly they jumped in the back of the pickup truck and now they're in the back of the pickup truck heading out west with this random friend that the guy doesn't know that they're in the back of this pickup truck. Like, okay, you think that they would jump out if the truck started moving? I would think to jump out if that was the case, you know?
Yeah, especially if you don't know where it's going.
Yeah.
Like, before you get too far, you know?
Yeah, like, and therefore, like, especially with John Jr. knowing about Orangeville, if he is starting to head out of town because he grew up in Caledon, you'd think that he would, you know, put 2 cents together and think, okay, maybe I should jump out of the truck. But
yes.
But anyway, like, it's highly, like, so, like, this theory was very close and shut very quickly. But by all known accounts, John Sr. McCormick's comment was his most significant contribution to the entire search, which was called off by the police shortly after midnight. The name of the friend with the pickup truck was later identified as George McCullough, which I will speak about him later, as he is a very colorful character. Investigators initially dismissed the boys' disappearance as a case of 2 runaway teens, which seems to be a very common conclusion when there's no clear evidence of them being taken. And the police suggested that they'd probably gone to the Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto. And nobody in the families know where this theory came from.
I was gonna say, like, this kind of just seems like out in left field to me.
Yeah, and
like something super random for like a 14 or 15-year-old to want to go to.
Yeah, and Eric's older brother Dave noted that Eric never mentioned the exhibition even once. So highly unlikely that they would run away to the exhibition in Toronto. And the boys running away together seemed very far-fetched based on a few facts, where first off, neither boy had a change of clothes. 2, Eric's new backpack was found in his closet. You think that if they were going to go somewhere, they'd probably take a backpack or a bag or something.
Yeah, they take a little something to put stuff in anyways.
Yeah, John Jr.'s wallet was left on top of his dresser. So if they were going to an exhibition, you'd think that he'd want to take his wallet, probably if he had a little bit of cash on him, maybe to buy something, maybe to buy food, typical. But no, it was left on his dresser. And both boys left their bike at the farm. They didn't take any of the field cars. So what, they just went on foot and hitchhiked when they had bikes, or they had cars that, even though it was illegal, they could have technically drove, whatever. Like,
back in the 80s, there wasn't as much emphasis on like enforcing those kind of laws. It was just kind of like everybody just did it.
And
the policing back then is a lot different than the policing.
And also at this time, you have to remember that Eric was close with his family, and the Larsfolks didn't even have a phone yet, because they only were living in Caledon for a few weeks before Eric disappeared. So they didn't even have a home phone. So Eric wouldn't even have a phone number to call. So like the Larsfolks were like, nah, like this is fishy. Like there's no way that he hitchhiked and stuff. And the Larsfolks were also very adamant that Eric had never hitchhiked and would never run away. So
yeah, like had no reason to run away.
Yeah, like where John Jr., like you could see him running away because of how bad his relationship was with his dad. But what would be the point of Eric?
There's a lot more of, shadier stuff going on there.
Yeah, where with Eric, like he had a good relationship with his family. His family never stopped looking for him. Like they've been really cooperative with investigators and the media and stuff. Like. So,
like they've shown that they've cared. They just want him home. They want answers.
Yeah, they just want to know that he's safe, right?
Yeah.
So the McCormicks refused to speak to any reporters, and those close to the case described the McCormick's unwillingness to aid investigators, which was noted by the Snellgrove OPP as well. And it wasn't just John Sr., it was every member of the McCormick family wouldn't speak to any reporters about the disappearance.
Just so weird.
Which is shady.
Me. Yeah, like, it doesn't add up.
Yeah. And as days turned into weeks and months, lead investigator Bill Curry of the Snellgrove OPP said that the routine teenage runaway case was looking more and more ominous. Like, no way, but it was at this point where they're like, hey, there's some sort of foul play here that's going on. So in early November of 1981, the OPP conducted a 6-hour search of the swamps, woods, and gravel pit on the McCormick farm using a helicopter and infrared heat detecting cameras capable of locating decomposed matter and disturbed ground. But no physical evidence was found, and the ground search was abandoned. So if the boys had been buried, like there's no way that the boys were buried on the property of the McCormick farm.
Yeah, there was like no signs of it anyways.
Yeah, so Paul Lalonde, which was the father of the children that Kim McCormick was babysitting that night of the disappearance, he drove Kim home at 9 p.m. on August 24th, 1981. In the short interview that she did with reporters, Kim said that she was immediately concerned when she saw one of John's old vans was leaking oil in the driveway when she got home, which she said would piss off their father, so she immediately set out to warn her brother, but she couldn't find him anywhere.
Yeah.
Kim insisted that there was absolutely no one else at the house except her father when she arrived home, but the Lalondes remembered differently when they dropped her off at home. So when Paul got home from wherever he was, it didn't say where he was, he packed up the kids and Kim into his car and drove her home, and that's when he saw both Eric and John Jr. outside in the driveway with their bikes. So he said that he saw them there.
Yeah.
Paul's wife Maureen mentioned that Paul drove a large beige Lincoln, and that he specifically mentioned that when he got home he was very cautious about turning around because of the kids in the driveway. He didn't want to hit them or anything, But nevertheless, he left and went home after Kim got out of the car, and he said that she physically walked over to Eric and John Jr. So, like, contradictory witness accounts going on.
Yeah.
This is just kind of, I guess, the aftermath of the McCormicks and kind of where they are now. So John and Joyce McCormick separated in 1986, only 5 years after the disappearance, and John Sr. died of cirrhosis of the liver on October 25th, 1987.
It doesn't say a lot, does it?
No. And for those who don't know, cirrhosis of the liver is a type of liver damage where healthy cells are replaced by scar tissue. And because John was a raging alcoholic, the only thing that would have...
alcohol is typically a key factor in cirrhosis of the liver.
Yeah, and due to his horrible alcoholism, the only real treatment that would have saved John was a liver transplant, which... people who are alcoholics aren't usually very high on the transplant list.
No, because they're just gonna get a new one and destroy it too.
Yeah, so...
like Frank Gallagher was not on the list. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, exactly. Both Kim and Joyce moved away from the area soon after the divorce, and they both haven't responded to repeated requests to be interviewed by any reporters or investigators, and other surviving family members could not be reached. The family also wouldn't cooperate with the Larsfolks either, so it wasn't even just reporters and investigators. They just wouldn't talk with Eric's family about it at all either.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so...
that's the McCormicks wouldn't talk, or the...
the McCormicks wouldn't talk to the Larsfolks. Yeah. In 1981, the Larsfolks' search for Eric and the truth about what happened that night had only just begun, and they still continued to search for what happened. After Beverly Larsfolk, which was Eric's mother, she died of breast cancer in May of 2000. Lloyd moved to a basement apartment shortly after her death, and this apartment was in Brampton. And for years after his disappearance, Lloyd frequently returned to the McCormick farm in the surrounding area looking for any sign of Eric. He was noted to have walked the property every month of every year that passed until the day that he died.
Yeah.
It came out later that the McCormicks actually packed up John Jr.'s room within the first week that he was gone. And yeah, and sometime after that, they put up a headstone for him. Yeah.
Bro, he's missing at this point, not declared dead. Now he would be declared dead legally because he's been gone over 20 years.
Yeah.
You get to be missing 20 years before being officially assumed dead without a body.
Yeah. So Andrew Livingston, which is the reporter that I mentioned that wrote for the Caledon Enterprise, he noted in his articles that it was the McCormicks knew that John Jr. wasn't going to be coming back, which just added to the sketchiness of them not wanting to cooperate.
Yeah.
So pretty much, other than Kim, the only other family member who have ever spoken to reporters about John Jr. was John Jr.'s Aunt Darlene, who was married to John Sr.'s brother and lived next door to the McCormick farm, so she was also living on the same road, and she was the only family member to speak out to the media. Darlene talked about her experience with John Jr. and how much time he spent at their house due to the nature of his relationship with his abusive alcoholic father, so he was over there more than he was at home. Darlene also noted that John Jr. adored his mother and tried to get his father's love when he was younger, but never succeeded, so eventually he gave up trying. Livingstone noted that she was talkative about John Jr. And the way that he grew up and how often he came over, but apparently the conversation took a turn when he asked her about the night the boys vanished, and she wouldn't say a whole lot about that night, but would only talk about what came before or what came after. He noted that he questioned about how much she actually knew, and he believes that she was actually scared to talk about what actually happened that night. Darlene unfortunately died in 2012. Didn't say from what, just that she's no longer with us.
Let's see there.
Unlike some high-profile cases of missing children in Ontario in the 1980s, Eric and John Jr.'s disappearance failed to sustain the interest of mainstream news media. In the absence of credible information, rumors spread online and in the Caledon community. I'm going to talk a little bit about an OPP officer in Caledon named Robert George or Bob Lewis. He was a Caledon OPP officer whose 30-year-old career ended with his retirement in 1997. In 2006, several victims came forward with claims of sexual abuse by Lewis that had occurred when they were young teenage boys in Caledon in the 70s and 80s. So during the time of the disappearance. Following 2 Caledon OPP investigations, Lewis was officially charged with 25 sex-related offenses involving 10 teenage boys. He was convicted of 19 of the 25 charges.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah. Lewis had attacked his victims while on duty, often using his cruiser. His victims described in court that they had been intimidated by Lewis's uniform and stature as he was over 6 feet tall. So that matched with the uniform. Like, oof.
Yeah.
Lewis had also befriended many of his victims' families, which just, twist of the knife, And the area where Eric and John Jr. had disappeared was also Lewis's regular hunting ground. So it was suspected that he had something to do.
He knew the area.
Yeah, so
very well.
They were it was highly suspected that he had something to do with it, but obviously there's no evidence to say that he was. But a forensic reporter, which I mentioned at the beginning of the case, named Patton, she noted that Kim mentioned Lewis's name in her original interview with him, but later denied knowing who he was. So Lewis could have been a friend of the McCormicks. Like, it's very possible, but that is it was highly suspected that he possibly could have had something to do with their disappearance, but he wasn't charged with anything because obviously the boys have not been found and their bodies haven't been either. So
that's crazy.
Yeah. So do you remember when I said that John Sr. had a friend over at the house on the night that the boys disappeared?
Yeah.
So the colorful character was George McCullough.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about him now, and where I put the trigger warning about animal cruelty, it has to do with George. So I highly recommend, if you are really weary about animal cruelty, anything like that, and you don't want it to be described, I recommend you probably stop listening now. So, and I have to talk about it in detail so you can get a vivid depiction of who this guy was. So if you drove 20 kilometers north of the McCormick farm and take a few turns, you'll eventually reach the home of McCullough that he occupied in 1981, which was a small brown house that a lot of sources said that it was a shack, which just adds to the shadiness of who he is. And
the shack your sister saw in Calgary on our way from Calgary to Banff, to Canmore, and your sister's like, that's sketchy. She's like, it was literally the house was so set back, and the shack was pretty well beside the road, but it was this tiny, it looked like a kid's play thing, but it was made out of wood, it was homemade. And she literally was like, is that a murder shack? And I was like, I don't know, I'm not from here, man, first time seeing it. And she's like, I feel like there's bodies in there. I was like,
oh my god.
That was your sister the day we arrived. I was like, oh my god,
my goodness. Insane. Of course,
it just makes me when you say it's a shack, I was like, it made me think of that shack.
But yeah, so they described it as a small brown shack, and even back then apparently it was in incredible disrepair, so it was just in bad shape all around. Little is actually known about McCullough, other than the fact that he was a mechanic who worked odd jobs on the McCormick farm, and he also worked on and off at John Sr.'s auto repair shop on Hockley Road, which I used to work near there, which is nice. In 1981, McCullough was 27 years old with 3 daughters, and it was noted that at the time he was in a relationship with a woman named Isabel Stokes. Livingstone also made it very apparent in his articles that he was a very intimidating person and he scared a lot of people. He wasn't friendly, to say the least. Those close to the case of the missing boys know that McCullough's name and reputation, and specifically there are 2 distinct stories that are horrible that just show who he was. So the first story is that he burned down a house, killing his wife or girlfriend, so that's great. He is a arsonist, apparently. And the second is about his dog, which is the animal cruelty part. So in July of 1999, in July 1999, 46-year-old McCullough used a chain to tie his 1-year-old Rottweiler named Nikita to the back of his truck.
These are cute.
I know. For about 1.5 kilometers, McCullough drove fast, dragging Nikita on the road. According to witnesses, when Nikita collapsed, he would stop the truck and make her stand up, and then he would continue driving.
Asshole.
Yeah, so...
Can we do that to him?
Right? So...
He deserves that poor puppy.
I know. During the highly publicized animal cruelty trial that followed, McCullough was verbally and physically confronted by an angry mob of 24 people, which... rightfully so.
Rightfully so.
Yeah. Less than a year after the trial in March 2000, McCullough died of lung and throat cancer. Deserved. And
well, I mean, deserved, but like still didn't suffer enough.
Well, of course, yes, but at least he's dead now. Which I don't like to say that people should be happy that people are dead.
Like death upon anybody, but like if you do that shit, you kind of deserve it.
It's a sign of psychopathy, so like very obvious. But John Sr., if you remember, John Sr. said that his friend McCullough was supposed to be heading out west in his pickup after visiting their house, and legally it is unknown of McCullough's whereabouts between 1981 and 1999. So nobody knows exactly where he was, if he was if he did go out west or not. Like, there's no real proof of where he could have been. And since he did a lot of odd jobs, like, it was all like under the table stuff, so there's no like legal documentation for any of the money that he's been taking.
That's insane.
Yeah. So on August 25th, 1981, Lloyd Larsfolk stood with Snellgrove OPP officer in the gravel pit, dragging the water in search of the boys' bodies, while tracking dogs from Canadian Forces Base Borden. Followed the boys' ascent to an electrical shed at the gravel pit's west edge, the exact spot where Dave said he had walked with Eric, John Jr., and Kim just days prior to the disappearance, before the dog turned around. So Lloyd had noticed a white truck on the property when they were investigating the gravel pit, and it was parked near the barn covered in red clay, and apparently McCullough was also standing there with his coveralls also caked in red clay. He was getting dirty doing something. What it was, Who knows? Darlene McCormick did note that sometime after Eric and John's disappearance, she received anonymous calls from someone who told her to watch out for Sarah, which was her only daughter. And her daughter was 6 or something at the time. Like, she was very, very young. But but she did say that she thought the voice sounded like McCullough's, but trying to figure out whose voice it is if that person doesn't regularly call you, probably really difficult.
Yes.
But Lloyd also received anonymous calls after the disappearance. In one instance, a few weeks after the boys disappeared, Beverly picked up the phone, and the person on the line said that Eric and John were being kept alive in the basement of a home in Caledon. So Beverly and Lloyd waited until dark, then drove to the house with flashlights. Lloyd broke in, made his way to the basement, and shouted Eric's name. The homeowner chased him out with a gun, shooting at him as he fled, but no injuries occurred. Which just shows how much Lloyd and the Lars folks in general were desperately trying to find Eric.
Desperately trying to find answers, yeah.
Yeah. So in 2011, Livingstone had a brief interview with the OPP in Curry, the lead investigator of Snellgrove OPP, but the OPP didn't reveal much, obviously. But Curry noted that McCullough and John Sr. were suspects at one point in the boys' disappearance. In October 2010, which this name is the same as the last case, so Detective Inspector Andy Karski of the OPP Criminal Investigation officially reopened the case. So at this point in 2010, he was working on the case of the missing boys, and then a few years later, he took on the case of Sonia Varaschin. So, he was working on both these cases. In October 2010, 6 locations on the McCormick property were searched using ground-penetrating radar, which can detect soil disruptions up to 3 meters below the surface. One of the areas radared was the McCormick's barn, which had only been searched once before May 2000. Apparently, a new cement floor in the tack room of the barn was poured in the week after the boys' disappearance. So very
Why is
suspicious.
it always a thing? Like, everything is always like, oh, a new cement base, conveniently a week after people disappear.
Yeah. So it is unclear if the McCullough's property was ever searched initially when the boys were disappeared. The OPP refuses to confirm or deny details about the search and the investigation or comment on the status of the case, which I think is probably the best way to go about it. Livingstone said his recent discussions with Dave Larsfolk made him reconsider the narrative he pursued in his series with Caledon Enterprise. He said that John McCormick Sr. probably lost his temper with John Jr. and both boys were killed as a result. That's what he assumes. There's no verification on what actually happened, but that's what he assumes.
Mm-hmm.
No trace of Eric or John has ever been found, keeping the possibility alive of a different ending to this missing persons case, hoping that they could be alive somewhere out there. But in my opinion, I think it's probably highly unlikely. At the time of their disappearance, Eric was between 5 foot and 5'2", and was between 79 to 85 pounds. He has freckles across his cheeks and nose, blue eyes. One front tooth was slightly dark, and light brown hair that was parted in the middle. He has a small brown birthmark on the left side of his waist. He was last seen wearing jeans, a blue and white checkered long sleeve shirt, and tan work boots. And John Jr. was 5'4", 95 pounds. He was right-handed, had freckles on his face, and had a thin build. He was also blonde, and he had shaggy hair. His upper teeth were straight, and his lower teeth were slightly crowded. So, like, the way that his jaw was depicted in the pictures was, like, his face is, like, normal here, and then his jaw is like this. So okay. it's very, like, crooked. But if anybody listening knows anything about Eric Larsfolk or John McCormick Jr. or anything about their disappearance, you can contact Caledon, Ontario Provincial Police Office directly at 905-584-2241, or you can contact Canada Unsolved at canadaunsolved.contact@gmail.com, which will also be in the description. But yeah, those were the two missing cases. Yeah, the Eric and John case, like, I remember looking into this for the first time. I was in high school. I was, like, on my way to a hockey tournament, and I was, like, looking into, like, unsolved cases in Canada. Because I originally wanted to, like, write, like, a book about, like, unsolved cases in Canada and stuff like that, and each chapter would be its own case, which I obviously never did. But that was when I first heard about it. So, yeah, there's still time. But, yeah, like, the McCormicks are shady. Shady. I think it's very obvious that the McCormicks know a lot more than everyone else in the case.
Yeah, they know more than they're leading on.
But in the fact that, like, John Sr. just didn't even give a shit that his son was missing and was sitting on the couch drinking a beer as he normally always does. He
probably hired someone to take them or something, like.
Well, I think it's highly possible that he, like, especially since McCullough was there, like on the property that night, like, I think it's probably very obvious that they probably both got angry. They snapped, like, killed the boys, and McCullough probably got rid of them. Yeah, like, put their body somewhere that nobody would think. And there was no evidence that McCullough's property was ever searched, like, properly. So
it's a problem.
Yeah, like, I don't know if it was in, like, 2010 when they started, like, when Hartsky took over.
2010, that's too late to be.
Well, it would still find skeletal remains, and, like, there would still be decomposed stuff.
That should have been done years ago to potentially, like, still allowed the other two to, like, live out their full life, like.
Yeah.
You know.
So, I think that the McCormicks and McCullough have took the secret to their grave. So.
Yeah.
But.
It certainly seems that way.
It's the fact that the amount of times that I've driven past, like, the houses of the Larsfolks and McCormicks, it's almost like, it's like, in retrospect, it's, like, so, like, creepy to know that I've, like, passed by, and I, like, worked near McCullough's house and stuff like that. Like,
That's crazy.
I
There's like
know.
the case that we'll talk about in a future episode where it's literally across the road from like a good friend of mine, like one of my best friends' parents' houses, and where she grew up. And I drive past that house like not daily, but like pretty regular. Like I probably drive by that house at least 3 times a week, at least.
Wow. Yeah.
So
I remember you saying that you wanted to cover a case out there. So like it's
yeah, I just don't like. There's not. It's gonna be one that'll probably be coupled with like a multitude of stories from like here because it is like there's again not a lot of details. Like it's not a well-known case or anything. Like even though it is a triple homicide, it's so there's not much details.
yeah, in typical Canadian crime fashion, there's not details that are just
Yeah,
openly out there. But that's
yeah, for
why I
sure.
wanted both of these cases like in the same episode because like obviously they're from the same area. They're both unsolved, and
Yeah,
like separately they're only like half an hour each of recording. So like
yeah,
it like worked out really well like comparatively, but it is a
yeah, for
PSA
sure.
episode for like especially child abuse really
Yeah,
because I think that if John Jr. stayed at his relative's place an extra 2 weeks in Virginia, both boys would be alive.
yeah. It's not for sure guaranteed, but it's definitely a high probability that they would be.
Yeah. But again, it could like have nothing to do with the McCormicks, and maybe John Senior is just he hated his son so much that he didn't really care. Like it could have been that
Yeah,
easily.
he's like, great.
So
If I get answers, cool. If I don't, whatever. It's not gonna change anything, kind of thing.
he's like, honestly, he won't piss me off anymore, right? Like it could have easily
Yeah,
been something like that, and it could have been someone completely with nothing to do with any of the people that I've talked about. But
yeah, and like full disclosure, like these are just like our opinions. Obviously, like the facts are the facts, but like the rest of it is like our own personal opinion. And just
yeah,
kind of like our thoughts behind based on everything, like based on the facts, like of what we do know. We don't know any of these people personally whatsoever. But yeah, so
yeah, like our opinions are obviously not like any investigative or we don't have access to like the actual police reports or we can't go back in time and figure out what happened. So like our family wasn't even in the area during this time, so it's not like we have any
no,
distant
yeah,
connections either. So
yeah, no,
but
we definitely have none that I'm aware of.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah, like we have family down where you are, but other than that, like we
yeah,
don't have a lot of family down that way, not at that time anyways.
yeah, exactly. I guess that's the end of episode 18. So if you ever want to get in contact with us, either to suggest a case or to give us any updates on any cases or tell your personal experiences, that's up to you. But you can email us at worstcasemacchiato@gmail.com or you can DM us on Instagram or TikTok at worstcasemacchiato. And if you do have any information about either of the cases that I talked about today, both of the numbers and information about contact information that I discussed earlier in the episode. They will be listed in descriptions in both the Instagram and in the podcast description as well. So you don't have to try to write down the number frantically during the episode. But without further ado, we hope to see you in the next one. Bye!